corrected the one I sent you.
Okay.
And I started off with like the basic information, like the name, the age, the educational level, the schedule, the levels, and the ages of the students. Because since it's like primary, they all put like um, if it's first grade, like I think they're like from six to 7.
Okay, so you have age. Is this the age of the teacher or the age?
Of the students.
And up here?
The age of the teacher.
Okay, do you think they'll mind
Or,
answering it?
I don't. Yeah, they probably.
I mean, that's fine if you don't think it's intrusive, if you think that they won't mind.
I don't think they'll mind.
Okay. I mean, it's optional too. You
Yeah.
can tell them if they don't want to.
Yeah.
Educational level, schedule, levels you teach.
Or I think it's grades, right? Grades.
Could be grades, yeah,
Not
might
the
be.
levels.
Right. Yeah, well, levels, this would be like English level, right?
Yeah.
And then this would be like grades, like first grade, second grade, let's see. So maybe.
Grades.
Okay, so do you create lesson plans? Do you? Okay, you just add a period after problems. And I would put here after group in parentheses S to indicate if there's more than one group with problems. How often do these problems occur? Do these problems affect the lessons? Do these problems affect? Do you mean, do these problems affect the lesson plan, or do these problems affect what?
Yeah, like the lesson plan.
The written lesson plan?
Or do these problems affect the way you implement the lesson?
Okay, something like that.
Yeah.
Do these problems affect the way you implement the lesson plan? Or have these, I would say, have these problems affected or influenced the way that you implemented the lesson plan? I would say. So they can think of like an occurrence where, oh yeah, I remember one time this happened, there's a problem, and I had to do something. So how did, come on, Caleb?
Have these problems affected the way you have implemented a lesson plan?
Right.
In what way?
Problems. Okay, so let's see. Have these problems affected? Okay, yes, I'm getting there. So maybe say like if yes, or link it to this. If you answered yes in question 5, da da da. If not, continue with lesson or question 7. Will you allow observations? And are there more questions?
No, I think what's
okay, maybe if you can, in 7 and 8, if you can merge those into one question and say something like, would you be willing to participate in, and then list the different techniques that you're considering. Would you be willing to participate in interviews, have your class observed, and what else? Let's see. What are you considering for your
Just will you allow observations to take place in your class and do you have time to be interviewed?
Are those the only two data collection techniques you're using?
Yeah, because I mentioned the lesson plan above.
All right, so your data sources are lesson plan, interviews, observations, interviews. Nada más?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that ought to do it.
Will you allow observations to take place in your class and interview?
Will you allow observations to take place and to be I would say and to be. Yeah, that's fine. And how many teachers are you planning to apply this to?
I mentioned something about doing a case study, like if there's one that is really
Right.
specific.
Mm-hmm.
If not, then I'll probably observe like 3.
But how many are you? Because we're going to use this to help you determine right the between 1 to 2 or 3 teachers that you want to do your research on. How many teachers do you plan on applying this questionnaire to?
Well, I was in the school that I'm going to. There's only 3 English teachers.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's okay, only to apply it.
Well, here's the thing, like, yeah, this is going to depend on your availability, but the purpose of applying this is for you to hopefully find the best participants. That is, the teachers that stand out, that have something unique, or that they have a situation that's different than the others. And the more that you can apply this questionnaire to, the better. But obviously, we have time constraints and logistics and all of that. But the idea is for you to consider how many that you can possibly apply this questionnaire to. Thinking about, obviously, the practicalities of the study, but if you are focusing on one school with only 3 teachers, you may want to try to broaden the scope, at least to apply this. You may later choose, okay, at one school, 2 teachers, but you have a reason to do that. Mm-hmm. But try to avoid choosing that one school without getting the results first. It may turn out that and maybe you know these teachers, this school, and you think that there's something really unique, which is fine. But if you could apply it, for example, to 3 schools, and you have some, let's say, 15 questionnaires answered, and you have analyzed it quickly and say, okay, this school is it. You might find that maybe another school or other teachers have something even more unique that even might be easier and helpful for you. The point of this is, even though this seems like a hassle, the idea is that you choose those teachers that really help your study, right? Because you spend the extra work now doing this, and later things will come together, I think, a little easier, instead of maybe choosing a teacher or 2 that end up not really giving you what you want, right? So we want to try to take every precaution and try to be very systematic in how we're selecting the teachers so that you have greater odds in getting the information that you want. And because you're doing a case study, you really want to find those unique cases, like something that's really different, interesting to you, or just different than maybe the research, right? And then you can choose those. Now, obviously, you have constraints as far as like logistics. I mean, you have to consider your own context about what you can do and where you need to be in your own, So it's a balance, but I would try to apply this to as many teachers. Now, I don't know. There's not really a number per se that you need to do it, but the more the better. And the analysis is very quick. It's not like a detailed. You don't have to transcribe. You kind of look at it and say, okay, they answered this way, and from there you choose. So try Do you have an idea about how many?
Yeah, I can. I was thinking about applying it to that school, but I found out that there's only 3 teachers.
Okay.
In the other school, there's only 3 teachers too, so that's like 6.
Now, 3 teachers in total, or 3 teachers for a particular group
No,
of
like
teachers?
in total.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or
So
are
that's
there any
like
schools that may have like just a lot of teachers where it would be easier? You could go one time and get maybe 8, 10, or more.
I don't know. I think that's how many teachers they have because they take two groups. So one teacher is for first and second.
Okay.
The other is for fourth and fifth, and then sixth.
And what age group are you considering? Any age group?
Yeah, as long as like they have like
Okay.
a really specific problem. And I think the one I'm thinking that is going to work is their fifth. I think I don't know if they're fifth or sixth graders, but I think it's also like the hormones are like affecting them. And
Okay.
like they're
Okay, so I mean, those are things that you suspect, and this is what you're looking for. So if the teacher says, "Oh, I have some groups, 56 groups, they're just all over the place," that and they say, there are many different factors, many different reasons why you would choose different teachers. So do your best to apply it as many as possible, and if you can find a school that has more, obviously that would be easier. So you don't have to drive or wherever. You have to work out all this transportation, that trying to get to all these schools, and plan on, whatever you think is easiest, taking a copy of it and waiting as they complete it.
Or, I'm probably gonna wait because
otherwise,
if they say they'll give it to me later.
Right. So, try to get as many as you can, and preferably applying it, hopefully this week or the first part of next week.
Yeah.
And then that way we can talk about the results, and then you can determine which participants, that you can focus on.
Okay. So this one is okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now for the interview, because the observation sheet is quite simple, right? Just like the activity, the description, what are they doing, and the time they start and the time they finish.
Right. And probably think in mind the time that you're observing, if you can obviously have access, you need to have access to the written lesson plan and kind of observe it first, kind of get an idea, and then because you're going to be then ultimately comparing the written lesson plan with your observation sheet. So I think if you write them out, the sections as we just discussed, kind of linking it to the lesson plan, I think that would be the
right. So that one's quite simple. Okay. And for the interview, can I ask them like questions, or because I have some questions here. I don't know if I can.
Yeah. So how many questions do you have in your interview guide?
Like six questions, and then.
Okay. And your 6 questions, can we look at those 6 questions? What is your first question?
Think about a class that you have taught and like outline the steps you took as you taught the class.
All right. Think about the type of question you have in your interview guide and try to, let me look at, there we go. There are 2 general types of questions here, and one question is you're asking in general what they do. Mm-hmm. The second type of question is asking a question specifically what you observed, thinking that this interview probably will occur after you've observed. Mm-hmm. Now, I guess you could ask, have an interview before. But in your case, considering your research questions, I really think it won't be necessary to have an interview before, because the main purpose of your research, again going to your research questions, is you're focusing on how they deviate or how they change or modify. So you need to see first that happening. So I would design your research and your interview guide and focus on questions that are directly coming from something that you observed. Now, you're not going to be able to predict beforehand everything, but for the interview guide, at least for our purposes right now, and thinking of designing it, just come up with some possibilities. And and so that I can see that more or less you're focusing on more things that could happen in the classroom. And most of the time, it's just rephrasing it to say, okay, I noticed that this happened, and then form a question.
Yeah.
And so when after you observe, you're going to revisit your interview guide and make some you're going to adapt it, make some changes based on what you actually saw.
Okay.
Right? Maybe some of the questions are what you saw, but more likely there'll be some small things that you need to change. But the premise, the basis of the question will be the same. I noticed that this happened, or that the students did this. How, and then think of how, what, why, where, and think of the question where it's based on an actual occurrence that you observed. Okay. And since this will be in a semi-structured interview, you need to organize your interview guide in such a way that you're not just asking question after question. That that you have a guide there. It can be a list of keywords. It can be just maybe overarching questions that are general, but that you ask other questions that relate to that one question. And because what you want to do is try to have it as conversational as possible, as we talked about. So you're really wanting the teacher to kind of open up. Typically, we start general and say, okay, this class, how do you think it went today? Just start and see how the teacher starts talking.
Yeah, this one was more like a question and then answer question. So
Okay.
I can just leave like the question just so I can look at them and ask them.
Yeah. So there's several approaches. If you want to write out the question and refer to it, fine. Some people just write the key concepts.
Yeah. Okay.
And again, a lot of the key concepts or the key questions will come from what you observe. But typically, too, I would keep it kind of start from the general to the specific. So you don't want to, because ideally you want to see how the teacher responds to the general question and what they detected. So since you're going to have, or the teacher will have already applied or filled out a questionnaire, they're going to know that you're looking at something about problems or something. And in the questionnaire, you're not mentioning anything about. Oh yeah, you are. You're talking about deviating from the lesson plan. What question do you have that you're stating? I think you have a specific question. Yeah. Now that I think about it, I'm wondering if it would be better just to have questions about the lesson plan, but not a specific question about have you ever deviated from the lesson plan, because so not to really inform them exactly what you're going to be looking at.
It says, do you have any problems? Well, that's
okay, that's general, right?
And then how often do they occur?
Right, that's okay.
The one number 5, it says, have these problems affected the way you implement a lesson plan?
Yeah. So I'm wondering, instead of that question, if you just ask a question of going back to the lesson plan, how important is the lesson plan to you, or how useful is doing a lesson plan? And kind of leave it at that. Leave the questions you have for problems. Maybe replace this question about being very specific about deviating from the lesson plan, and change that and ask how important or how helpful is it? How helpful is it to complete a lesson plan beforehand? Or how does it help your classes, or something to that effect? And just leave it at that. I think you can still get enough information to know which teachers to choose from. And then when you observe the teacher, they won't know exactly what you're going to be looking at or looking for.
Okay, so I have like how often do the problems occur, and then like how helpful is the lesson plan to you?
How helpful is completing a written lesson or a lesson plan when implementing your classes? And just leave it at that. Because what are the possible answers? Well, they could say, oh, it doesn't help me at all. Or they could say, oh, it helps me when I'm doing this because I don't know, I go back and I look at the lesson plan afterwards. So now the teacher's saying that he or she is reflecting, right, without you actually specifically asking, do you reflect on your? So that's kind of the idea, is that you ask general questions, giving the respondent an opportunity to answer your question, but you're not specifically answering it. And so what I'm proposing here, or suggesting, is that you try to do this both in the questionnaire here and when you do the interview. You do the same thing. How do you think class went today? So they talk about problems. Oh, this was changed. It was different. Oh, so this was different than what you planned for. Oh, okay. Even though you've already analyzed that, you don't say, oh, I noticed here that you deviated. You say, how did it go? Da, da, da. Oh, okay. So is that how you usually do it? Okay. Why did you do it this way? Okay. Was this different than your lesson plan? Or maybe they suggest, they say, oh, yeah, I planned for this. And then you can say, oh, yeah, I see that you have this. And so it's conversation, and you're kind of guiding the teacher to your answers or to your research questions. Now, obviously, if they don't, after a couple of attempts, they're not still giving you what you need, then you need to be more direct and ask more specifically what it is, because at the end of the day, you need to try to get those answers. But the trick is to make it as conversational as possible and kind of direct them into the areas that you need for your research questions. So the interview guide. One suggestion is to have certain key questions, general questions that prompt you. Okay, I got to remember to ask that. But think of all the sub questions that you can ask. The second is I would specifically have in some part of your guide your actual research questions, just to and look at those and remind yourself before you start. Okay, this is the main focus. Here's what I'm going to ask specifically based on what I saw in class. And then what I do too is, or suggest, is have another section on your interview guide where you have the question words: what, how, why, where, with whom. And you just have a list of those question words. And at the moment that you're asking questions, just put a tick mark next to each word. You just kind of glance down and say, okay, I'm going to start with the what question first. I saw this in class. I think I'm going to ask what first. Yeah, so what question? And then they answer. Then you look down and say, okay, now I'm going to ask a how question based on the same thing that you're talking about, but how? Or maybe the teacher answers how, even though you don't ask it. Check. Okay. And so the idea is that you not necessarily fill out all of the question words, but that you have at least 2 or 3 or maybe 4, depending on how the teacher responds. But you have kind of a systematic way to kind of remind yourself, okay, I'm getting of that one item, that one thing that happened in class, I'm finding out as much as I can about that one thing. So this is kind of another trick that you can kind of do, and that you can kind of do at the moment that you're having the interview. So the guide is there to help you kind of, and you're going to be recording, so you don't necessarily need to take notes. You're not writing down everything that they say, but you want to look at the guide and keep reminding yourself, okay, research questions, okay, I need to ask these questions, okay, and the how, what, where, okay, and you're kind of using that to help you throughout the interview, because you don't want to leave the interview thinking, oh, I should have asked this, right? And it happens, right? But you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. But yeah, that would be kind of what I would suggest. So just come up with a format that's easy to read for you, that works for you, that makes sense. But those 3 things, I think, try to come up. That would be a way to try to set up a semi-structured interview.
Okay. I also have another question that was related to the other one, because it says, remember, if yes, in what ways do these problems affect the lesson? So I have to take that one out too.
Well, yeah, or you could say, or in your guide, in what way, how is it again?
Because I had how often do the problems occur,
All right.
and then we
so how often does, and then leave a blank, how often does Ekis happen, or how have you addressed this problem before, or in this, because you're going to be seeing how they do it in the class, but you could ask, how have you done it before, okay? But try to focus again on more questions based on what's actually happening, because you don't want too many questions about how do you approach this, kind of general, like as a daily practice. You really want to focus on what happens just in those 3 or 4 weeks of data collection.
Yeah, but this one's on the other one, on the questionnaire.
Okay.
So this one, because we have.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking.
Sorry,
Okay.
I was thinking about this.
All right.
One.
So your question again? Can you ask it again?
It was how often do these problems occur? So that one's okay.
That's okay.
And then we said the one that how helpful is completing a lesson.
Okay.
That one's okay. And we had the other one that it was if the problems occur, how do they change lesson? I have to take that one out.
I think we can take that out.
Yeah.
Because it might just reveal a little bit too much at this point.
Okay. Can I ask them, like, do you always complete your entire lesson plan? Or do you always...
I was thinking you could ask, but I'm not sure about this either. How important is completing the lesson plan to you? How important is it to complete the lesson plan? But I'm not sure. Do we want to say that?
Because we have how helpful is completing a lesson plan when implementing your lesson.
Okay, so maybe another question: how important is it? I mean, how important? Because they could say, "Oh, it doesn't matter if I finish it or not." Because also think of these research questions from two perspectives. One is they should help you. The answers to those questions should help you determine which teachers are best for your study. And the second is which questions complement the most your other methods of collecting data, because you're going to use those. It's not just to find the teachers for your study. You're going to use those later. So you might also, in your interview guide, address a few questions related to how they responded in the questionnaire, right? So when you do your interview, you're going to have answers to the questionnaire, and you're going to have your own observations. And from those two bits of information, you're going to say, you answered this way in the questionnaire. I noticed this. Then you ask your question. So I think we can have a second question. How important is it to finish a lesson plan? And that might reveal, and then you could say how important is it, and why or why not, for them to explain a little bit. And I think that'll provide a little insight as to kind of their approach or their position on implementing a lesson plan.
How important is it to finish a lesson plan, right?
And then ask why or why not. How important is it?
Why do you think it's...
Yeah, why or why not? Or just explain. You could just say explain so much detail.
So if I ask them, do you always complete the lesson plans, or do you carry out? I can say like that. So this is the first one.
Say, do you create a lesson plan? If yes, would you be able to? Okay, do you find the way? Okay, maybe group the lesson plans first and then follow up with problems. So maybe just move those up. So how often do these problems occur? So how often is completing a lesson plan and implement it? Yeah.
Okay.
How important is it to finish the lesson plan? Explain your answer up there. Okay. Yeah. So I would start with the lesson plans and then bring the two problem questions down. Yeah, that's it. Looks fine to me.
Okay.
And so probably no more than 2 teachers, really, to observe.
Okay.
Because I'm thinking, for example, 2 teachers, and you, like one teacher you observe 1 week, every day maybe, and another teacher every day. Because you're really looking, I'm assuming they're having class once a day. I don't know how they. Okay.
I think they have 3 times a week. 3 times.
Oh, 3 times a week?
Yeah.
How many hours a week?
1.
Okay. Okay, so maybe you observe 1 week and see how much information you have. Then we can kind of see if you feel like you have enough information to answer your research questions. Because if possible, I'd like for you to allow at least a week, or in case you look at your information, you think that you need one more interview or one more observation, you still have enough time to do that. And if you finish, if we finish our design, we're practically finished. Go ahead and start on the data collection. So I give you, another week. We're completing our second week here. We've got 2 more weeks. But if you finish everything next week, then I would start with your data collection a week early, so give you 1 extra week, right? Just in case something happens, they cancel school one day or something, and you need to observe another day. So.
Okay. So if I apply this to like a lot of teachers, and it doesn't matter like what school, if it's private,
No.
or it's public, it doesn't matter.
No. The only thing, I assume you're focusing like on the START program, right?
Yeah.
But even, because you mentioned START program a little bit, right, in your literature review, or not?
No, I don't mention it. That's why
I think basically you're looking for teachers who frequently write out in fact, always write out their lesson plan. So, I mean, I don't think it really matters the age necessarily.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'll apply the questionnaires and see what's the answer.
Yep, and if you, once you have those, then the next step would be to choose and talk to those 2 teachers and kind of work out the logistics, okay, when can I observe you, and try to plan as much as you can the next 2 or 3 weeks as to when you can observe, kind of work out with that teacher so that they know that you're coming. Also think about the permissions. I don't know if we've talked about that. If you think you need permission to go to some schools, really now's the time to start doing that, at least asking what the procedure is, and if they need letters. Even if it turns out that you don't go to that school, I would recommend doing that now, because sometimes it takes a while to get the signatures, and I've had cases where the students are waiting. We're in the time to be doing the data collection, and they can't do anything because they don't have their permission, and it's out of their hands. I mean, this is something that you can initiate, but at the end of the day, you're really waiting for someone else to sign a document. So try to do that this week if you know that there's certain schools that may need permission, just so that that's not a hang-up, that it's not going to cause you to wait, to collect data.
Okay, so I'll see like the people I apply the questionnaires to, and then get the names of those schools.
Right, and you may ask at that time, do you need permission? Kind of what's the procedure? And it may even require first that you talk to a director or somebody first, even before you approach the teachers. I don't, to go do your, be mindful of school policy, and, ask the appropriate questions. And, if you think I would always go to the director first, say, look, I'm coming here, and so that they know that you're there doing a study. And at that point, they're more likely to tell you, or you can ask, obviously, do you need permission, or do I need permission, or is there a certain protocol that I need to follow? And then from there, you can kind of see. And if you think that, at that point, too, you'll kind of know if that's going to be a good place to do your study, too, because if there's a lot of restrictions and you think, that look at it from not only the teacher standpoint, but the school policy standpoint to see how feasible and
Okay.
because if it's really problematic and you have other schools, then maybe it's just as easy to go with another school. So okay.
Okay.
All right, you're welcome. So we'll see. Once you have your results, if you want to talk about your results before our next tutoring session, just come by and we can discuss those.
Yeah, because it's until Thursday, and I'll try to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you can apply something earlier, better. And then,
But we don't have class on Monday, right?
do we? I don't know.
I don't
guess
think
not.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I don't like boys don't have school, so I guess we don't do that. All right, so we'll see you then. Next week.